So check into what your values are, because this is going to help you to make the decision that's not just best for you, but it just is going to flow a little bit easier. And you will know because it feels like the energy of making the decision seems to come a bit more freely. It doesn't feel like such a hard resistance to it. Welcome to this week's episode of the G-Spot. I'm Gila Zak, certified hypnotherapist, and this is the place where we talk about all sorts of things human behavior related, subconscious, hypnotic. And today we're going to talk about a very common experience that we all have, and that is indecision. Difficulty making a choice, maybe a hesitation that causes us to put off making that decision. Now, one of the most common things that people tell me when it comes to finding it difficult to make a choice is that they're afraid of making the wrong choice. And what if you could consider that there's no such thing as a wrong choice? In fact, in my business, we say there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. And we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for progress. So when we're talking about fear around making a decision, it's often because we have a memory of a decision or a choice we made in the past that left us with a feeling of regret or remorse, or we just weren't quite satisfied, and it left us feeling that there was maybe something we should have done differently. So I invite you to think of the word fear as an acronym for getting every available resource. Now, as hypnotists, this is our specialty. We help you go into a place where you have access to internal resources, strategies, solutions, and tools that you don't have available to you through conscious thinking. So the internal resources that we could guide you to would be really going into those places and spaces where you remember that you were resilient and adaptable and flexible when you made a choice or a decision that didn't quite work out the way you had initially wanted. And see how that wasn't the worst possible thing that could have happened to you, that you survived it. The other available resource to you are external resources. These are people who are, experts in their field. Perhaps they are a trusted advisor or someone you know that you can go to for advice when it comes to making a choice. There is one fun thing that you can do with hypnosis among many fun things, and that is that you can create an internal wise advocate. So what this would look like is you could go into a space or a place in your mind where you can meet with someone. This could be a character from history, this could be a person from a movie, this could be anyone, even if it's someone who was close to you that's no longer with you. And you can ask that person for advice. Now, an example of this is when I was a new hypnotist, brand new, I'm in a session with a client and I'm starting to feel like I'm getting stuck. And I just closed my eyes for a moment and I imagined the director of the college, the founder of the college, Dr. Kappas, and I asked him in my mind, what do I do now? And I could hear his voice and I could see his face, and this is what he said: "You're making it too complicated. Keep it simple." So this is an example of how we can create our own internal wise advisor or wise advocate. Another aspect of making it difficult to make a choice comes from the concept of perfectionism. And this is something that I think all of us have touched upon and encountered at some point in our life, right? And even if the consequences of the decision are quite minimal, sometimes we can still be faced with this analysis paralysis because we're looking at it through the lens of perfection. I've touched upon this in other videos. There's no such thing as perfection. Perfection is an illusion. It's a distortion of the mind, and it's very subjective. So I'm going to be doing a whole video on perfectionism, but for now, suffice to say that when you're looking at making a choice or decision based on perfectionism, you're really limiting yourself, because excellence is a model that goes far beyond perfection, and it also doesn't know a bottom. So when you go into the space of wanting to make a decision and you're not needing to be perfect, you can just be excellent, this can open and broaden the perspectives of how you might get to the decision you're looking to make. Now, I want to be really clear about something. Oftentimes people will say, I don't have a choice. And we're saying, well, what do you mean I don't have a choice? Well, I have to do this or do that, but I feel like I don't have a choice in the matter. And the truth is, we always have a choice, don't we? As long as we're living and breathing, we always have a choice. Oftentimes, we just don't fucking like the choices. We don't like this or we don't want that, and so we are feeling limited in our choices, but the truth is we always have one. And then there's this sneaky little thing about not making a decision, not making a choice. And that is a choice too. It's simply bubbling up from the subconscious level, and we call this avoidance or procrastination. I know you felt that before. Now, the way the subconscious mind works is it is of a predictive nature. It's always trying to predict what's going to happen tomorrow based on what we're feeling today. And oftentimes what we're feeling today is a result of something we experienced yesterday. So we can see this timeline of behavior that is working at the subconscious level, that when we're talking about making a decision, we can feel overwhelmed. Now, sometimes this happens because there's too many options. Now, an example of this would be if you are in the store and you're looking to buy a color of paint for your walls. And you're not quite sure. I mean, you go into the hardware store or you go into wherever it is and there's just a fucking shit ton of colors to choose from. So it can be overwhelming when there's too many choices. And the subconscious doesn't like this. It can't predict something if there's too much data, too much information. It wants the narrow, it wants the predictable, it wants the familiar. So here's where I would advise to you to break it down into little bite-sized morsels. If there are too many options for you when it comes to making a decision, then start prioritizing and weeding out those things that are absolutely hard no's. And this is going to help you to get to that space and place where the subconscious is going to feel less overwhelmed and more easy to go into that space where it can predict the best possible outcome with fewer choices. I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but trust me when I say this works every single time. Now, a personal example for me is that years ago, we were looking to remodel our kitchen. And the designer comes over and she brings all these books with all the different possible kitchen cabinet doors I could choose. And I know the way I am. If I have too many choices, I get hit with that analysis paralysis too. So she hands me this first book, and on the cover is a cabinet that I like just fine. And I say, you know what? I really like that. I'll take that one. And she says to me, what, you're not going to look at the other ones? And I said, no. And she was flabbergasted. But I know me, and I knew if I had 30 or 50 different cabinet doors to choose from, I would have been there for an hour. And it's been 24 years now, and I still love those cabinet doors. So you can make an effective, good decision based on less choices. Trust yourself. Now, sometimes we find ourselves in a difficult place of making a choice simply because we are unclear of what it is that we need to connect with. What are our values when it comes to making the decision? So what does this mean? Well, if we are out there trying to choose a job, if we are trying to decide between where we should move, if we're trying to just make a decision on where we want to eat dinner, quite frankly. I mean, how many times have you had that happen? Where are we going? I don't know. And then next thing you know, you end up arguing. Who knows? But you see what I'm getting at? What are the values that you need to connect with when it comes to making this particular decision? Is it a community that is going to really bring you a sense of fulfillment and connection? Is it a job that's going to bring you in equal parts of passion and satisfaction, but also financial security? So check into what your values are, because this is going to help you to make the decision that's not just best for you, but it just is going to flow a little bit easier. And you will know because it feels like the energy of making the decision seems to come a bit more freely. It doesn't feel like such a hard resistance to it. The other aspect of that is when we make a decision based on our identity. Each of us have identities and roles that we play in different areas of our life. But when we are trying to make a decision and we factor in our identity, this can help us to even get more clarity about what the most likely best decision would be for us, because it's going to be in alignment with how we see ourselves in this particular situation or in this particular experience. Now, here is one that maybe you've thought of, maybe you haven't. And sometimes decisions are hard to make because it's a fear of commitment. Maybe it's just trying to choose what movie to watch on Netflix or Hulu. But you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like this fear of commitment. Now, when it comes to bigger decisions, we can feel this fear of commitment, and trust me when I say it's all at the subconscious level. You don't know that this is what's driving it. I'm giving you the inside hypnotist scoop right here. The fear of commitment could be, I'm going to lose a measure of freedom about myself or my autonomy or my space. The inability to make the decision could come from feeling like someone or something is going to have more control over you than you would like if you go with that decision or this one. So check in with yourself and ask yourself, is this true? Because what I like to tell clients is that in every experience there is a moment of choice. You can either create it for yourself or it will authentically bubble up. And in that moment of choice, you get to decide what this means to you. So if you recognize or realize that perhaps this indecision is coming from a fear of commitment, a fear of losing your freedom or your space, then ask yourself, is this really true? And how do I want to feel about it? Now, one of the most common areas that I see this is when it comes to relationships. People have been together for a period of time, a short time or a longer time, and then it's maybe, should we move in together, or should we take the next step? Whatever it should be that is a big one. And one or both people are having trouble getting to that place because they're afraid of this loss of perceived freedom. But if you are your own spiritual authority, if you are clear in your own identity, and you have your own interests and your own things that you do outside of the relationship, then you can be free even when you are in a relationship. So think about that for a minute, because that's a common one I hear. Well, if we move in together, then I'm not going to have my freedom. Is this really true? Because if the relationship is important to you, hopefully you can communicate on what it would be like to be in the same space, but also have a sense of autonomy and freedom. The other aspect of this I hear often is when people are deciding whether or not to get a dog or have a child or take on some big life commitment like buying a home, whatever that might be. And we can see that this also comes into play, because if we are very accustomed to having a very big and fluid sense of freedom, then oftentimes at the unconscious level, even little simple things, as opposed to just the big things, can be perceived at the subconscious level as infringing upon our freedom. Another interesting aspect to this is ambivalence, or inner conflict. So we might be looking to make a decision, but maybe we have these conflicting emotions and feelings. Now, sometimes what this looks like is, I know what I want, but what if I get what I want? Will I be happy with what I thought I wanted? And sometimes the ambivalence is just feeling disconnected, not having enough of an emotional investment in the decision that we need to make. So it makes it hard to even go into the space where we can feel into the value, the identity. What is this decision or choice going to do for me? What might it not do for me? So we have to look at the conflicting emotions and feelings around something, because this is at the unconscious level, again, happening without you even knowing about it. And as hypnotists, what we specialize in is helping people to get clear, especially when it comes to big decisions, on what the likely outcomes would be by using our imagination, kind of what we call future pacing. Finding ourselves at the fork in the road, or maybe we're at a crossroads, or we're at a tri-level path we could take. And in the hypnosis, we could future pace, play these out and see what they would be, so that you can connect to them more emotionally without the inner conflict. And if there is a substantial or a very prevalent inner conflict, the hypnosis is especially helpful for looking at why that is and to resolve that. And that in and of itself can make the decision, big or small, much easier to make. When we talk about ambivalence or inner conflict, there's also this thing in hypnosis called the double bind. And you already know this. This is just a fun little techie term that we use. But what is the double bind? Well, it often looks like this. I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. So we feel like we're faced with 2 or 3 or however many choices it might be, but we feel like in any situation, we're not going to get what it is that we really feel we want or need. So the double bind specifically is, if I let go of this, I'm going to have to take a hold of that. Or if I take a hold of this, I might have to let go of that. Or both of these things really sound like a shit decision, and maybe you need to start over. Now, if that is the case, again, let's loop back around to what is the value in the decision? What is the identity? What is the feeling I'm looking to connect with? Because if we're stuck in a double bind, it might really truly be it's a damned if I do and damned if I don't situation. But sometimes we've created that through our imagination, and it's not really true. Isn't that interesting? Let's talk about the big C word. Confidence. Oftentimes, analysis paralysis comes from simply a lack of confidence in oneself. Maybe we've lost somewhere along the way the ability to trust that inner voice, that instinct, that intuition, because we felt in the past that something really fell apart. It went to shit, went to hell in a handbasket pretty quick. And maybe it happened over a long period of time. So we looked back at that choice and that decision and thought, wow, that was a fucking waste of time. And so it affects our confidence in a way that today is kind of clouding the lens. So think of like the smear of Vaseline, you know, on the lens to give it that diffused kind of effect. This is how a lack of confidence can negatively influence us when it comes to making a decision. So here's where in hypnosis we can go in and get clear and see that there are really no such things as mistakes. I want you to start to consider that these are just missteps on the path of life. And they're information, it's data. It helps you to get clear on what works and what doesn't work, what you want or what you don't want. And I've seen this with people who've been in long-term jobs, long-term relationships, and they find themselves in a situation where they're at a crossroads and they need to make a decision, but they're struggling because they don't want to look back. Well, this was all for naught, or God, I wasted all this time or money, or I moved to this whole new place for this thing and it didn't work out. Remember, it's feedback, it's not failure. So when we don't link our confidence to a misplaced feeling of failure, we can't help but feel more confident about the decision in front of us. I like to look at this as these stepping stones, right? Every decision we make, whether we feel it works out for us or not, is just a stepping stone on the path of life. And if we make a misstep, yeah, we're going to learn something from it and we're going to grow and it's going to make us that much stronger. And when I work with professional athletes, when I work with high-level CEOs, when I work with even just the average academic student or person off the street coming with this lack of confidence, I say to them, you know, what if failure was just feedback? And that feedback was a rung on a ladder that you are creating for yourself to climb to that place of success that you're looking to get to. And that's a really interesting image, isn't it? That's my specialty, using the imagination in a playful way. Another little tidbit that you might like to know from a hypnotist is that oftentimes this issue can become a problem because, let's face it, people are looking to avoid accountability or responsibility. So what does this look like? The analysis paralysis comes into play when we realize that we might have to be accountable to someone or something, even if it's ourself, as a result of making this decision. Even if it's a desirable outcome overall that we're looking for, if it's creating a sense of responsibility or accountability that we're not ready to step into, the subconscious mind is trying to protect you, baby. What it's designed for. It is designed to learn, first and foremost, for the purpose of protecting you. And so if that accountability or increased responsibility is going to be perceived as fear or as emotional pain or restriction in some way, then the subconscious is going to keep you, it's going to pump the brakes. Hey, wait a minute. Maybe I'm just going to avoid this whole thing altogether. And the interesting thing is that you're not doing this consciously. But I know that by you taking the time to watch this and hear what I'm saying and let it process and percolate for you as it will over the coming hours and days, you're going to find that you start to notice when these different aspects of indecision are coming up and perhaps keeping you from getting from point A to point B. So finally, there's emotional attachment. Now, if we are overly emotionally attached to what it is we either need to leave behind or change or shift, it can make it really hard to make a decision based on these other options that are available to you on the menu of life. Now, what this might look like is we've been in this house for 30 years, but we really want to move to be closer to this person or that job, or maybe go live in a place that we've always wanted to live, but we're so emotionally attached because this is where we raised our kids or where we got engaged or wherever it was. And so that emotional attachment can make it hard for us to make the decision. The emotional attachment could also come to the fact that we just have really strong feelings about something that's underneath the surface of conscious awareness that is somehow also tied to where we are today, that makes it difficult to go where we want to be or where we might need to be. So take a look and ask yourself, what are these attachments? Is it something that I can live with? How can I bring what I'm really emotionally attached to over here into this new experience? Now, there was a time when I used to be a personal organizer for people, and I'd go into their house and organize their closets, their kitchens, whatever it was. And people are so emotionally attached to their shit. They're so attached to their objects. And it's not the object itself that they're truly attached to. No, it's not. It's the experience that they associate with the object. So if you're looking to assess where is the emotional attachment, how can I take this with me? Do I just take the one object, the 3 or the 5, or just the memory of it? Because emotional attachment, those strings can run deep. And this is where a hypnotist can really help you to see, I can bring this here with me over there. I can really build upon the value that this is going to bring me, making this new choice. And then it makes it easier to cross the bridge from emotional attachment to something new, taking the best of what was into what will be. So what do we do with all of this, Gila? I've given you so much good information here when it comes to choices and indecision. This is a wonderful thing that you can learn, and you can use it for anything, not just this, because we've talked about identity, we've talked about value, we've talked about avoidance, and we've talked about emotional attachment, right? So what I invite you to do is consider this wonderful technique called the drop through, or the drop down. So if up here we have the choice that we're having a hard time making, indecision, and maybe up here we're feeling frustration. Now this frustration, if we were to just pretend, maybe you can do this now, close your eyes and just pretend that you're feeling frustration around a decision. You can't make it. You need to make it. Maybe there's a deadline looming. And if you were to sit in that frustration as if you were in a little bubble, or in a hot air balloon, or in kind of a really cool glass elevator of sorts. And if you were to drop down through the frustration, what might be under there? What's the next emotion or feeling? Maybe that's confusion. And if you were to drop down through the confusion, under that you might find fear. If you were to drop down under the fear, perhaps there might be something else. That's right. And if you were to continue dropping down, going layer by layer, eventually you're going to get to what we call the nothing. This is where the client says, there's nothing. Isn't that great to get to that space where there's absolutely nothing? This is what the Buddhists call the nothingness. There's no push, no pull, no tension, no release. It's just, it's delicious, isn't it? And when you get to that nothing space, here is where you can feel a sense of ease, of flow. Let your energy move from top to toe as you breathe. Tell yourself these words: calm, peace, trust. And in that space of nothingness, this is where you get to begin to infuse inner resources. Maybe the wise advocate, maybe the voice of a loved one who you've always trusted to tell you just what you needed to hear in the moment when you had to make a choice. So in the nothingness, you get to bring in, cultivate, and infuse internal or even external resources, and then you bring them up through all the layers. Maybe this has a color, a quality, or texture to it, and you bring this up through all the layers, and you'll notice that it starts to diffuse the confusion, it diffuses the fear, it diffuses the frustration. And then it's almost just like if you've been underwater and you dove to the bottom of a pool, or you've been in the ocean and you dove down to grab a handful of sand and you're bringing it back up with you to the top. When you get to the top of this drop through, coming back up, it's like bursting your head through the surface of the water. And here's where you're very likely to find the clarity that you might need to make that decision. But I really encourage you to remember that there's no such thing as a mistake. It's a misstep if you didn't get it right the first time. Clearly there are life decisions that are going to be momentous, going to be really big, and are going to have very likely much bigger consequences or outcomes for you. But when it comes especially to these everyday little ones, don't sweat it. Be more playful with it. Take some of the pressure off. Give yourself a break and try the drop through. I know you'll find it helpful too. If you have found any of this content helpful, please feel free to like and share with other people. Leave your comments down below. And there's also going to be a link to a hypnosis audio that I've made just on this topic. It's a short little dose of hypnosis that you could connect with if you need even more support in making a decision today. Thank you for spending your time with me here on the G-Spot. I always appreciate your time. It's so precious. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.